The federal corruption case against two top former JEA executives is moving closer to an expected February trial date. And here to walk us through some potentially consequential new legal maneuvers on the case is Florida Times Union Metro columnist Nate Monroe. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning, Ann.
How's it going?
Oh, I can't complain. I'm happy to be here with you as always.
Same. Thank you. So, your recent column explains the potential impact and irony of a new motion in this case. Explain to us what was filed and what it is that the defendants in this case, the two former executives at JEA, are trying to prevent jurors from hearing.
Sure. So, as you said here at the outset, we're in this kind of weird phase of the kind of pre-trial segment of this case where we're getting really close to a trial date, and there are just lots of motions being filed by the defense. One of those motions is a request to the judge, Brian Davis, that he prevent prosecutors from showing jurors any evidence discussing JEA's current financial and operational metrics. So in other words, they don't want to really litigate how well or how not well JEA is doing right now. The reason that's important is because, as a lot of listeners will recall, these two executives were indicted because of an alleged conspiracy they had to skim profits off the top of a sale of JEA to a private company. Now, part and parcel of that scheme was their effort to justify why JEA needed to be sold in the first place. And what prosecutors have said is that the executives, presented the board of directors with a very contrived and essentially fraudulent business case. They accused the executives of concocting a kind of doom and gloom narrative about JEA's financial state several years ago. And so the prosecution rightly, I think, views the JEA's current financial state as kind of an important part of their narrative. And the kind of short story here is that JEA did not suffer the kind of gloom and doom reckoning that Aaron Zahn and Ryan Wanamaker told the board it was in store for. They, at the time, were, essentially presented the board a choice. Either let us sell JEA, or we need to initiate mass layoffs. Hundreds of employees will need to be let go. We'll need to cancel plans to build a new headquarters in downtown. We will also need to consider a 26% rate hike in electric rates over the next several years. And this was kind of at the time, it was a stunning kind of choice to give the board. And there were lots of people at the time, in real time, myself included, who were very skeptical about that and felt like they were exaggerating some of the industry challenges JEA was facing.
Yeah, and it's kind of, maybe even at this short distance or mid-long distance, hard to recall how intense it was, the idea that they were suddenly saying we need to lay off 600 JEA workers.
Yeah, it was shocking. Again, I will say, as someone who raised questions about some of what they were saying, they did not appreciate that. They were very, very, at least outwardly, confident and I would say even cocky about this business case that they were presenting the board. And a lot of listeners will know this already, but just to kind of drive a point home here, the sale was canceled. Aaron Zahn was fired. The board was totally, turned upside down, and everyone was replaced. And no mass layoffs happened. JEA did build its new headquarters downtown. JEA has not raised electric rates 26%. There are some pressures on JEA's rates that have nothing to do with the kind of doom and gloom forecasting that Zahn's team was sharing several years ago. And JEA is, as it was at the time, it is just viewed as a pretty stable, pretty well-run public utility. There are challenges in the industry, but there is nothing. The utility business model and the public utility business model is not obsolete, and is not anticipated to be obsolete in the short, near, or even medium and long-term future. I mean, this is just not a thing. And that was kind of the crux of what Zahn told the board to sell them on the idea of privatization.
And you, in your reporting at the time, Nate, pointed out this discrepancy between what they were saying publicly and to their board and to their employees versus what they were telling the ratings agencies about their stability and their, the fact that they were not in immediate peril.
Yeah, I mean, and that was frankly something that I thought was really important at the time. They were telling ratings agency analysts a bit of a more optimistic story. They were also making regulatory filings with the state public service commission that actually projected small increases in electric sales over time. And this is when they're telling the board that they were anticipating a decline in electric sales. So, I mean, they were telling different audiences different things, and their explanations for that were always very convoluted and ultimately not very convincing. And frankly, one of the witnesses the government plans to call is a credit ratings agency analyst who very pointedly at the time tried to question JEA's executives about the presentations they were giving the board. This analyst didn't buy it, didn't understand why JEA was so bearish on its future electric sales. They were making assumptions about the number of people who would be installing rooftop solar that was like wildly out of line with the projections made by every other utility in the southeastern United States. So, I mean, again, there were people in real time who also thought that these projections were just kind of ridiculous.
And you pointed out in your column that, this evidence might not be permitted in court. There are pretty strict rules of evidence, and the judge may well decide, look, whatever JEA is doing financially now really is immaterial to what happened at the time. And that could happen, but you think it's important to remind people that there's truth to this issue, this case that exists outside of the courtroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly don't have a good handle on the kind of legal issues around what's called hindsight evidence here. I don't know that the judge will entirely prevent the government from introducing this stuff, but I also can sort of understand why, litigating JEA's performance today might be something that the judge doesn't want to necessarily get into in front of a jury. All that being said, yeah, I mean, whether that evidence can be used in trial or not, it does not compel the rest of us to just forget that none of this doomsday stuff has panned out. And we are, considerably removed now from the summer of 2019. And I think it's fair to start casting some judgments on some of the stuff we were told. It's just not happening. JEA's workforce, the last time I checked, JEA's workforce is actually slightly larger than it was in 2019. And so, very, very much contrary to the idea of laying off 600 employees being a necessary step. I mean, JEA is operating more or less fine and about as well as it's been operating for the past several decades.
So a lot of motions to be threaded through by this judge before, the trial date, still possibly on track for February. But Nate Monroe will be watching your columns in the Florida Times-Union to keep us current on the latest in this case. Thanks so much for the update.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Ann.
My pleasure.